And in our first conversation, we're looking at Nigeria's transport sector with the National Transport Commission Bill, which seeks to provide a regulatory body and law for the sector. The Transport Trade Group of Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industry say that there's this stagnation in the sector because of the delay in finalization of the National Transport Commission Bill. We have Mr. Olawale Rashid, Chief Executive Officer of African Railway Consulting and Executive Director of National Chamber Policy Center of NACIMA. He joins us now right there in Abuja. Great to have you. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Right. So, first of all, help us understand the essence of this bill.
Yeah, the Transport Commission Bill seeks to actually provide a regulatory framework for the transport sector, which presently we don't have, and it seeks to provide a competitive basis for stakeholders and operators within the system. It provides for a commission, National Transport Commission, which is to be like NICOM is to the insurance sector, like PENCOM is to pension fund, and something like a regulatory framework. And this bill was introduced in 2013. It was passed by the two chambers in 2018, but presidential assent was withheld, and for some reasons, I think around 4 reasons. But what stakeholders are saying is that we need that bill to come on stream because that sector, the transport sector, remains virtually the only sector without a clear regulatory framework, because this is already affecting investment in the sector, standardization in the sector, and sustainability of the sector. So the Transport Commission Bill is actually a bill that is very well needed now more than ever. And stakeholders are calling on the presidency and on President Muhammadu Buhari specifically to assent to it, to make it become a law before we end this tenure in 2023.
Right, but how does this, commission complement other, regulators with, some other transport sectors like the air transport and the other transport sectors that we have?
Now, the standard practice is actually to have a regulator for the transport sector. So we are supposed to have what they call executive commissioners. Commissioners for aviation, for rail, for road, and for marine, and for road too. Now, each of these commissioners will actually be heading a full department, which is a regulatory department. It has no impact as such. The only impact is that the present regulators in the aviation sector will now transform to become a commissioner, an executive commissioner, under the Transport Commission. And it will still be performing the same function. They will still retain all their normal departments. As of now, the railway has no regulator. NRC is both the operator and the regulator. So that's executive commissioner for rail will now be in charge of regulation, heading a full department. The same thing will happen to port, and the same thing will happen to road. As to marine transport, safety issues will be out, and that's one of the contention why the president withheld assent for the bill. But I don't think it will have much impact, except that the commission will now subsume some other existing agencies in terms of their functions and activities.
So do you think, the president should still, assent to this bill, even though, he's raised, some of those concerns? Do you think it works that way?
Yes, it works because, one, that sector, the transport sector, remains about the only sector without a regulatory framework. And because of that lack of regulatory framework, it's affecting a whole lot of things. Can you imagine what is happening in the railway sector? How can NRC be the regulator, the operator? The road sector has no regulator as at now. The impressive development we have in the telecom is mostly associated with the fact that you have NCC actually regulating, providing competitive environment for operators and stakeholders within the system. So we think, and stakeholders at our roundtable also submitted that the president should sign the bill. We can now go further, just like what we did for the Electoral Act. We can submit subsequent amendments to that bill. In fact, the concerns raised by the president are simply issues that can be handled after signing it into law. And if we fail to sign it into law now, and 2023 knocks on the door, and what we have is that the bill will go back to square one. You now have to start all over again. And the bill that was introduced in 2013, is it not high time we have it into a law? We can now start amending any controversial sections that we thought should be amended. And we need this more urgently now. We need investment in the transport sector. Investment will not come if there is no regulatory framework.
Right, quite a long time there since 2013. But you're asking for a road corridor development agenda to transform roads and associated area into economy zones for sustainability. How is that supposed to work?
Yes, at our roundtable, we call stakeholders across the road sector, and the conclusion is that as at now, we are all in agreement that the road sector is in crisis. Underfunding, underinvestment, bad road. We are largely at the bottom when it comes to statistics on road safety, road wellness, and others. So the thinking is that we should not just focus on road construction. We should now move beyond just road construction. We should apply corridor development. And corridor development will actually cover things like, why do you need this particular road? Who are the expected users? What type of cars and vehicles will pass over it? What is this business model, sustainability model? These are some of the things the corridor philosophy we work on. And why stakeholders are calling for this is that as at now, we have underinvestment. We want investment in the road sector. Government alone cannot handle it. We already have 12 corridors already spelled out by the federal government. But we need a policy. And again, the policy has been in the making in the last 5 years. It has not been consummated. So the stakeholders were of the view that it is high time that policy is approved, is concluded, because this will help the road sector in terms of investment and sustainability.
Yeah, quite a number of recommendations there, but what other recommendations can you tell us, came from the roundtable you had on Friday?
A lot of recommendations. The first one is that stakeholders agree that, and they call on the president to sign the National Transport Commission bill into law. Secondly, they call for conclusion of the road corridor policy, that it should be concluded quickly and put it into operation. The third one is issue of multimodal policy. In other words, road cannot exist alone, rail cannot exist alone, aviation cannot exist alone. There should be complementarity, and there should be a policy guiding and regulating this. This will come, of course, under the National Transport Commission that we earlier talked about. So the stakeholders are actually calling for a lot of things, and we have sent the recommendations to the relevant ministries and agencies.
Right, and you talk about government not able to actually fund most of these investments, on its own. But how can the private sector, come in and actually bring in investments, into this sector and actually, make some profit, because they're not coming in there for nothing?
Yes, I think one of the proposals is that there is a need to deepen the PPP arrangement in that sector. You need to bring in the private sector. There is a model for it. The Infrastructure Concessioning Commission is working on that. There's a need to expand the tax for road construction initiative. The one we have, Dangote has taken up. We need other sectors, other players to come in. We need to deepen that line. We also need to conclude the road fund bill. That will also help. It's also still in the making in the National Assembly. There's also the need to explore what we call community ownership development initiatives. There are some communities that can actually take up road construction through their internal system. That is also in the pipeline. But overall, if you don't have the National Transport Commission bill operating, you can hardly have real investment in the road sector. Not just in the road sector, but also in aviation, in rail, in marine technology, marine transport. So we actually need to get the National Transport Commission bill up and running so that we can draw and encourage and facilitate investment into all the modes of transportation we have in the country.
Well, from your viewpoint, do you see, a private sector actually ready and, available to actually come in, to this sector?
The private sector is ready. The only constraint is that if you don't have a proper regulatory framework, nobody will want to bring in their money. So to bring in money into a sector, you need the law, the regulatory framework, and that's why the Transport Commission bill is necessary. If you sign it into law today, it will actually change the space. People will now see that their investment is safe, the environment is competitive, no monopoly will not be allowed or discouraged, will be moderated. And so, in effect, what we are saying is that you cannot get private sector in the real sense of it if the legal framework is not functioning well. And that's why stakeholders are calling for the president to sign that bill into law.
And what other implications are there if the law is not signed?
Yeah, if the law is not signed, one major implication is that the stagnation in the sector, in the transport sector, will continue. Rail transport is already in trouble. We cannot get the necessary funding. And this is also traceable to the legal framework. We are operating a 1958 Railway Act. All this will change if you have the National Transport Commission bill signed into law. It will also affect issue of road. As at now, there is high level of underinvestment. And to get money into the sector, you actually need a legal framework. You need a legal framework where your likely investors from foreign and local sources will be comfortable with their investment. So it has a lot of implications, and that is a negative for us if we don't drive private investment into that sector.
All right, for you now, Mr. Rashid, we have quite a number of modes of transport, like we have railway, maritime, but how do we, realistically, make all these modes of transport actually complement each other?
Yes, that is the question of multimodal policy we are talking about. It's also in the pipeline. The Ministry of Transport has been working on it, and when you say multimodal policy, you are thinking of seamless operation across the modes. That's marine, road, rail, and aviation. As of today, we don't have it. And unfortunately, road cannot operate in isolation. Rail cannot operate in isolation. The same thing with aviation and marine transport. So we actually need a multimodal policy. And again, this will take us back to the National Transport Commission. If you have the National Transport Commission, this is one of the issues that commission will take up quickly and urgently. And as of today, if you complete a road, fully completed, and you are now moving high freight load traffic on it, then the lifespan of that road will be what? Will be likely short-lived. But if you move high heavy load freight on rail, then you have a bit of complementarity. And if you move container directly from the shipping lines on the rail down to destination, to dry ports, whether Kaduna or wherever, you save the lifespan of your road, you reduce cost and mortality on the road. So there is a whole lot of things to gain by having complementarity. We need a multimodal policy. But again, that is the job of the National Transport Commission, which we don't have in place now. So we actually need to appeal, and that's the major appeal from private sector and from our stakeholders, that the president should, as a matter of legacy, sign the National Transport Commission bill into law. When you do that, what you have indirectly done is you have changed the face of transportation in the country. We know Mr. Fashola, Mr. Amici, and all of them are doing a lot in that sector, but it cannot come to fruition without having that bill into law.
Mr. Rashid, but, what for you, before I let you go, now, what for you are the major, possible challenges to the successful implementation, of this proposed bill?
Yes, there are complaints about some sections. Some of those sections include the issue of stabilization fund, that it was too high, freight stabilization fund, and some other things. But these are procedural issues that stakeholder thoughts can be handled when the bill is actually signed into law. You cannot have a perfect bill. In fact, a constitution is repeatedly amended and continuously amended. The same thing with any law. So there are challenges. The challenges will be, one, it will affect some existing agencies. And of course, people are scared. But why they need not be scared is that their interest is also already accommodated. Whoever is an executive commissioner now will likely be the present regulator in any of the modes. So we have challenges, but the challenges are small compared with the cost of not signing it into law. Just like what we have during the Electoral Act saga.
Right.
It was signed into law, not because it's perfect, but because we need it. And the same thing in the case of the Transport Commission bill.
Yeah, as you say, Mr. Rashid,
there are challenges.
Yeah, quite a number of, bills that, have been signed. But, what's the assurance that, if this bill is actually, signed into law, it's going to make a difference, for the transport sector?
Yeah, it will make a difference. From the rail perspective, you will now have a regulator for the rail sector. You don't have it now. Two, for the road sector, you don't have a regulator. You have a regulator. And what does a regulator do? Just like what NCC is doing, provide competitive environment for investors and for stakeholders. Presently, in the aviation sector, I think of all the modes, only aviation has a regulator, NCCA. The marine, the MPA is not a regulator. So we need an economic regulator for the transport sector. The contribution of the transport sector to GDP now is so low, it can be more, but it cannot be more if everything is so haphazard as it is now. For example, let me give you an instance. In the rail sector, we need investment. The Chinese funding is no more coming. Now, for it to come, for that funding to come, the regulator the investor wants to see a change in NRC. They don't want a situation whereby we are operating a 1958 Act, which is what we are doing. So it has more advantages than disadvantages. And our plea and our prayer to the presidency is that the National Transport Commission bill should be signed into law.
All right, we'll be watching that, Mr. Olawale Rashid. The importance of a solid transport sector cannot be overemphasized. Mr. Olawale Rashid, the CEO of African Railway Consulting Limited, thank you so much for coming on Business Morning.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Thanks.
All right, so after the break, we'll take a look at the commodities market. That's in a moment. Just stay with us. This is Business Morning.